He is a retired soldier. Although he narrowly survived years of brutal warfare, the endless killing on the battlefield left his heart unable to return to a calm and normal life. So he voluntarily applied to guard a lighthouse on a remote island far away from the mainland. He originally planned to spend the rest of his life alone on that island, watching over the lighthouse until his final days. Yet before departing, he unexpectedly encountered a girl. He believed the girl was only a fleeting passerby in his life, a beautiful scene briefly decorating his memories. But unexpectedly, the town official responsible for the islands suddenly invited him to visit his home. They all praised Tom for the great contributions he was about to make for the town and for maritime navigation. Listening to their words of praise, Tom could not help but lower his head in shame, because he chose to guard the lighthouse on the island only to reclaim inner peace, and never once thought about making any contribution. And at the official's home, he unexpectedly met Isabel. Isabel was exactly the girl Tom had seen standing by the sea when he first arrived in town. Although Tom fell in love with Isabel at first sight, and Isabel also showed frequent affection toward him, their brief encounter seemed destined to end before their story could even begin. Early the next morning, Tom boarded a boat and left the town, heading toward the lighthouse. After an unknown length of travel, he finally saw the legendary island. From that moment on, Tom began his days of living alone on the island. Compared to the tension and unease of the battlefield killings in the past, the vast emptiness and silence here gave him a sense of peace he had never known before. At last, he found the inner calm he had been searching for. But soon, 3 months passed in the blink of an eye, and the peace he once desperately sought gradually turned into loneliness without him even realizing it. Especially his love at first sight for Isabel made him think of her day and night, constantly imagining that he might see her again. This undoubtedly deepened the loneliness within his heart. To relieve the solitude inside him, he began finding things to keep himself busy, doing everything he could to avoid idleness. Yet loneliness was like the endless sea wind, constantly sweeping through his heart and filling his entire being. At this moment, he wanted to leave the island and return to that colorful and vibrant world. However, the 8-year contract he signed before departure forced him to grit his teeth and continue enduring, and so he continued to suffer through another stretch of time on the island, until one day, he finally welcomed his first vacation. After enduring days of longing, he immediately brought flowers and knocked on Isabel's door. Seeing his arrival, Isabel was filled with joy that could not be hidden. Over the next few days, the two of them were almost inseparable. It turned out that Isabel's 2 brothers, who had loved and protected her since childhood, had both died in the war, which gave her an unexplainable fondness for Tom because of his background as a retired soldier. She told Tom as much as she could about her past and her story. Looking at the girl he had fallen for at first sight, Tom sank into a sweet sense of happiness. But happiness is always beautiful and fleeting, and soon his vacation was coming to an end. He had to return once again to the island to endure those lonely days and nights. At the moment of parting, Isabel suggested going with Tom to see the island and the lighthouse. She pretended to be full of curiosity about life on the island, but in truth she only wanted an excuse to spend more time with Tom, although Tom also longed to be with Isabel every day. In the end, he firmly refused to take her to the island, because Tom knew better than anyone how despairing the loneliness of the island could be. He did not want the woman he loved to suffer through that kind of torment alongside him. But in the end, Isabel still appeared before him quietly and without hesitation. Isabel's presence made Tom's life on the island far less monotonous and painful. They farmed together, raised animals together, watched the sunset together, and walked along the beach side by side. Very soon, the two who had long harbored feelings for each other fell deeply in love. A few months later, during Tom's next vacation, the two held a wedding amid everyone's blessings. Immediately after, they returned once more to the island and began a happy and fulfilling married life. Time passed second by second as they remained sweetly in love. As their first child was about to be born, they lay on the grass imagining the beautiful scenes after the baby's arrival. But unexpectedly, dark clouds suddenly gathered that evening. Years of experience living on the island told Tom that a major storm was about to strike. He quickly herded all the livestock he had raised into the wooden cabin, then said goodbye to his pregnant wife and prepared to head to the lighthouse for duty. He worried that the violent storm might affect the lighthouse's operation, so he had to stay there to ensure it could be restored immediately if any malfunction occurred. Before long, torrential rain poured down alongside the raging storm. The wife left alone at home suddenly felt unbearable pain in her abdomen, and her clothes were already soaked with blood. She had planned to return to her hometown the following week to safely carry the pregnancy, but the sudden accident caught her completely unprepared. She leaned by the window and shouted her husband's name toward the direction of the lighthouse, but the howling storm drowned out everything, and Tom inside the lighthouse heard nothing at all. With no other choice, she stepped outside, struggling against the storm as she made her way toward the lighthouse. Yet when she finally reached the base of the lighthouse, she discovered that Tom, out of long-standing habit from his days as a soldier, had locked the heavy door from the inside. She could only pound desperately on the iron door, but Tom at the top of the lighthouse heard nothing due to the storm. When the storm finally stopped the next morning, Tom walked out of the lighthouse and opened the door, only then seeing his wife unconscious outside the iron gate. Panicked, he immediately carried her back home, and their child ultimately did not survive. With a heart full of sorrow, Tom had no choice but to set up a gravestone on the hillside for the unborn child. Although Tom was devastated as well, he still forced himself to appear strong and carefully comforted and cared for his wife every day, worried about her health. He even returned to the town to bring a doctor to the island, but the wife, who refused to believe that the child was gone, rejected the doctor's treatment. When she saw the doctor arrive, she suddenly ran out of the room and hid beneath the lighthouse, quietly grieving in sorrow. Left with no other option, Tom had to send the doctor away and instead invited a piano repairman to fix the old piano for his wife. Seeing how painstakingly Tom tried to help her move past her grief, the deeply moved Isabel tightly embraced him. But at that moment, neither of them realized that because Isabel's body had not properly recovered, not long after, their second child was born prematurely and passed away as well. The loss of 2 children in a row completely broke her. Every day she sat silently in front of the 2 small gravestones for hours on end. She lay on the ground, trying to listen for her children's heartbeats, but in the end she heard nothing. From that day on, the once cheerful and smiling woman never smiled again, drifting through each day like a hollow shell, until one day, Tom suddenly noticed a small boat drifting toward the shore with the waves. He rushed toward the beach, only to discover the body of a man lying in the boat, along with a newborn baby. His wife, who arrived right behind him, immediately held the baby in her arms, filled with joy, because over the past year and more, both of the children she was expecting had died. She believed this baby was a little angel sent by heaven to comfort her. As a mother who had lost 2 children in succession, she cherished the baby beyond measure. The sudden appearance of the infant soothed the wound of grief that had long plagued her heart. She wanted to keep the child by her side and raise it with care, but her husband believed the situation should be reported to the local authorities, letting the government decide the child's future. Yet the wife who had lost 2 children was desperate to be a mother, and desperately needed a child to heal her shattered heart. She begged Tom again and again not to report the baby. Faced with the desperate pleas of the woman he loved, Tom, who had always followed the rules, ultimately chose to give in to his wife's wishes. He decided to secretly keep the child and raise it together with his wife. To prevent outsiders from discovering their secret, Tom found a hidden spot and quietly buried the man's body. Then, taking advantage of the low tide, he pushed the small boat back into the sea. Immediately after, he forcefully removed the gravestone of the child who had died shortly before birth. When a few weeks later, the 2 fishermen who regularly delivered food arrived on the island, Tom deceived them by saying his wife had given birth prematurely to a daughter. The couple's lie did not arouse any suspicion at all. In this way, they successfully turned a strange infant into their own biological daughter. They named the baby Lucy, the name they had originally prepared for their first child. They cherished Lucy deeply, pouring all the love meant for their 2 lost children into her. Because for this couple who had lost 2 children in succession, the unexpectedly arrived Lucy was even more precious than a biological child. Time passed quietly, and 2 years went by in the happiness of their family of 3. One day, during Tom's vacation, he returned to his hometown as usual with his wife and Lucy. With the whole family gathered together, laughter filled the room and happiness overflowed everywhere. But that afternoon, Tom unexpectedly saw a woman kneeling beside a gravestone in the cemetery next to the church, crying bitterly, perhaps because of a guilty conscience and the lingering guilt in his heart. Tom felt that this woman somehow had a connection to Lucy. After the woman left, he unconsciously walked toward the gravestone, only to see that it read that the woman's husband and newborn daughter had died at sea due to an accident, and the date was exactly 1 day before Tom found Lucy. At the moment he saw the gravestone, Tom completely panicked, because that woman from earlier was very likely Lucy's biological mother. At that instant, Tom suddenly felt as if the happy world of their family of 3, which he had been immersed in, had collapsed entirely. Should he continue raising Lucy, whom he cherished like a treasure, or should he return her to her biological mother? Torn between the 2 choices, Tom fell into a painful dilemma. He could not bear to shatter his wife's happiness, so he never told her about meeting Lucy's biological mother, choosing instead to silently endure the torment in his heart alone. Soon, his vacation ended, and he took his wife and Lucy to say goodbye to their family once again, returning to the island to guard the lighthouse. Although on the island there were only the three of them, with no one else to disturb their lives, the words on the gravestone, and the sorrowful expression on Lucy's biological mother's face, kept replaying in Tom's mind again and again. In the end, he wrote a letter to Lucy's biological mother, telling her that her husband had been properly buried and laid to rest, and that Lucy had been adopted by kind people and was living well. Tom hoped this letter would help Lucy's mother step out of her grief, but what he never expected was that the woman who believed her husband and daughter had both perished at sea saw a glimmer of hope in that letter. From that moment on, she began a difficult journey to search for Lucy. Time flew by, and 3 years passed in the blink of an eye. By then, Lucy had grown into a lively and cheerful little girl who could talk and dance. Yet during those 3 years, Tom lived in constant inner torment, wrapped tightly in guilt every single day. He felt like a thief who had stolen someone else's daughter and kept her as his own. Until one day, it was the 40th anniversary of the lighthouse's construction on the island, and the town held a grand celebration for the occasion. Tom, who had guarded the lighthouse for many years, was invited to attend the ceremony, and as a quietly dedicated lighthouse keeper, he was also invited to speak on stage. When he stepped onto the stage to give his speech, he unexpectedly saw Lucy's biological mother sitting in the crowd, staring straight at him. Panic instantly surged through his heart, throwing his emotions into chaos. Flustered, he hurriedly said a few words before quickly leaving the stage. The woman who had been desperately searching for her missing daughter for 3 years also saw Lucy, and she immediately approached with warmth and concern. After years of avoidance, Tom was finally forced to face Lucy's biological mother directly for the first time. The woman then began asking Tom, who had guarded the lighthouse on the island for years, saying, "Do drifting boats at sea ever get rescued? Have you ever seen drifting boats during your years on the island?" Her questions instantly left Tom, who was riddled with guilt, frozen and speechless. The scene of finding Lucy 5 years ago flashed vividly before his eyes once again. Back then, he had not only seen the drifting boat, but had also personally buried the woman's husband, and he had taken this woman's child and raised her as his own. Faced with the woman's questions, Tom did not know how to answer for a moment. The woman's words also made Tom's wife sense an impending crisis, because it was she who had once desperately begged Tom to keep Lucy, and it was because of her pleading that Tom secretly buried the woman's husband and kept Lucy by his side to raise. The woman's appearance instantly made his wife realize the risk of losing her daughter Lucy. As soon as the lighthouse anniversary celebration ended, his wife immediately urged Tom to take Lucy and leave the town, returning to the island, and Tom finally made up his mind to reveal what had happened back then, and return Lucy, whom he had raised for many years, to her biological mother. But his wife continued to beg desperately, just as she had done years earlier when she pleaded with Tom to hide the truth and secretly keep Lucy. In her heart, she had long since regarded Lucy as her own biological daughter. As a mother, she would not allow anyone to take her daughter away. Forced by his wife's desperate pleas, Tom had no choice but to abandon the idea of returning Lucy to the woman. Yet tormented by guilt, he secretly delivered Lucy's childhood toy to her biological mother. He hoped this would ease the heavy burden of conscience weighing on his heart. What he never imagined was that this toy would plant the seed of his own downfall. A man was suddenly drawn to a high-reward notice offering $3,000 to find anyone who had ever seen this baby toy. And by coincidence, he had indeed seen it, because he worked part-time delivering food regularly to Tom, who guarded the lighthouse on the isolated island, and he had once seen this toy in Tom's daughter's cradle. For the reward of $3,000, he did not hesitate to report the situation to the local police. After receiving the information, the police quickly set out by boat toward the island. Tom, who had been guarding the lighthouse, also saw the police vessel rapidly approaching from afar. With his sharp instincts, he knew that the secret from years ago was about to be exposed. He immediately went to his wife and told her that what they had done years earlier had been discovered, and that the police were already on their way to the island. He told her that he would take all the blame upon himself and would protect her at all costs. When his wife learned that it was Tom who had sent the baby toy to Lucy's biological mother, causing the secret to be revealed, she became furious. She resented Tom for handing their daughter over to someone else with his own hands, but no matter how much she blamed him, everything was already beyond repair. She was destined to lose the daughter she had cherished and raised for so many years. Soon, 2 police officers landed on the island. Facing the suddenly arriving police, Tom confessed everything he had done. he took full responsibility and voluntarily led the police to dig up the body he had secretly buried years earlier. Immediately after, the family of 3 was escorted by the 2 officers and left the island they had lived on for many years. Looking at Lucy in his wife's arms, Tom felt a hint of regret at that moment. It was not regret over the punishment he was about to face, but regret over losing Lucy, whom he had lovingly protected for so many years. During the police interrogation, Tom admitted that he had once discovered a small boat on the island's beach. Inside the boat was the body of a man and Lucy, who was still an infant. Because both of his unborn children had died one after another, he was overcome by selfish desire and secretly buried the man's body. He then kept Lucy by his side to ease the pain of losing 2 children. Even after arriving at the police station, his wife Isabel still refused to hand over Lucy to the authorities. She desperately begged the police not to take Lucy away, because in her heart Lucy was more precious than a biological child. But no matter how she pleaded, powerless as she was, she could only watch the police take Lucy away. Because of her husband, she had lost Lucy. Isabel harbored deep resentment toward Tom, so she refused to testify on his behalf. When questioned by the police, she remained silent the entire time. In the end, Tom was arrested and imprisoned on charges of child abduction, but at this moment, Lucy's biological mother suddenly accused Tom of murdering her husband. She believed that her husband must have still been alive when he reached the island, and that Tom killed him in order to take Lucy for himself. The only person who could testify for Tom was his wife Isabel, but having just lost Lucy, Isabel was filled with grief and despair, and she continued to remain silent despite repeated questioning by the police. Because his wife refused to speak, Tom was instantly upgraded from child abduction to a suspect in the murder of Lucy's biological father. If the murder charge were to be confirmed, the consequences would be unimaginable. Tom knew that his future had become extremely bleak. While in prison, he wrote a farewell letter to his wife Isabel and asked a friend to deliver it to her. Because of her husband Tom, she had lost Lucy, the daughter she had protected for so many years, and Isabel was now filled with sorrow and anger. At this moment, her heart was full of resentment toward Tom. She did not read the letter, but instead threw it directly into a drawer. After losing Lucy, she became gloomy every day, silent and withdrawn, until one day, the police suddenly knocked on her door. It turned out that although Lucy had been sent back to her biological mother, in her mind, Tom was her father, Isabel was her mother, and the island was her home. Lucy cried all day long, insisting on going home, until one day, she took advantage of her biological mother's inattention and secretly ran away. That was why the police came once again to Isabel's home in search of Lucy. After learning that Lucy was missing, Isabel's entire family immediately searched everywhere through the night. In the end, they found Lucy's favorite doll on the beach. Lucy's biological mother finally understood that Lucy no longer belonged to her, because in Lucy's mind, she was nothing more than a suddenly appearing stranger. She prayed to heaven to show mercy and keep Lucy safe. As long as Lucy could return safely, she was willing to give up custody and return Lucy to Isabel. Meanwhile, Isabel continued searching for Lucy together with the police. Until dawn, they finally found Lucy sleeping on the ground by the pier, facing the direction of the island. The police once again sent Lucy back to her biological mother's home. Looking at the sleeping Lucy, the woman fell into deep thought. The next morning, Sheely knocked on Isabel's door. After Lucy's escape the day before, she realized that Lucy had long since regarded Isabel as her true mother. She told Isabel, "I am willing to give Lucy back to you, but I have one condition. You must go to the police station and testify that your husband Tom murdered my husband in order to take Lucy for himself." She gave Isabel one day to consider, then turned and left, to choose the daughter Lucy whom she missed day and night, or the husband who had loved her deeply and sincerely. This was the most difficult decision Isabel had ever faced in her life. At that moment, she finally remembered the farewell letter her husband had written to her from prison a few days earlier. In the letter, her husband told her, "I know that because of me, you lost Lucy, but the one who lost Lucy is not only you, it is also me. I love Lucy just as deeply as you do, but we cannot satisfy ourselves while making Lucy's biological mother suffer day and night. That would also be unfair to Lucy. Although the happy family of 3 we once had is gone, in my memory, you will always be my wife. Lucy will always be my daughter, and that warm little family will forever exist in my memories until the very end of my life." After reading her husband's letter, Isabel was already in tears. She immediately stood up and rushed toward the pier, running toward her husband. In the end, just as Tom was about to be escorted away from the town by the police, she arrived at the pier in time. She decisively told the police the truth. saying that when the boat was discovered back then, Lucy's biological father was already dead. It was I who desperately begged Tom not to report the matter, and secretly kept Lucy by our side to raise. She told the police everything that had happened that year. In the end, the police withdrew the charge accusing Tom of murder, but Tom and Isabel were both arrested and imprisoned by the police for child abduction. Many years later, Tom stood by a hospital bed and said goodbye to his wife Isabel for the last time. After that, Tom returned alone to the island once again, planning to spend the rest of his life there. Although he was alone at this moment, he was not lonely, because his wife Isabel and Lucy lived on in his memories. That warm family of 3 still lived on this island. I am a film enthusiast. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.